What's up?
Oh, I'm just compiling all the top sports scores, news, and odds so I can make the very best bets.
Me too. BetOnline.ag.
Join today and receive your 50% welcome bonus at betonline.ag.
What do the Bruins have to do to handle the upstarts from Columbus, Ohio? My name is Mike Petraglia, joined by Alex Barth. The Columbus Blue Jackets coming off one of the most stunning upsets in hockey history in round number one, eliminating the Tampa Bay Lightning, the President's Trophy winners, in 4 straight games. The first time that's ever happened. Columbus Blue Jackets had all the momentum in the world, and then they get 9 days off. The Bruins, having beaten the Toronto Maple Leafs in game number 7 here on Tuesday night at TD Garden, just get a day off, and then they play game number 1 against Columbus here on Thursday night at 7 p.m. Rest versus rust. Who has the advantage, Alex Barth, in game number 1?
Well, it's an interesting rest versus rust discussion because normally the team with the rest is the better team, the higher seeded team. You're talking about a bye. Instead, this time it's the lower seeded team in Columbus. It's an interesting case because Columbus, they've been sitting on cloud 9 for the last week and a half, and they had that practice with, 5,000 fans come out to the arena to watch them practice. They're certainly feeling good, but Bruce Cassidy said after the game, he's happy his team isn't getting any time off because they're clicking on all cylinders. They're doing everything right they need to do. He said part of the problem at the beginning of the Toronto series is that the team maybe rested a little too much at the end of the regular season. They maybe gave guys too much time off, not going 100%. So I think this favors the Bruins right now. Rest versus rust, it's an internal discussion. We'll never totally solve it, but huge for the Bruins right now. I think 1 day is the perfect amount of time they can physically recover, kind of emotionally recover, because a lot goes into a Game 7. But again, they're clicking, they're firing on all cylinders. They finally found their stride. They're not going to lose that sitting on their hands for a couple of days.
This Garden Report on Ice brought to you by the great folks at betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/win and use the promo code CLNS50 for a 50% cashback bonus on your first deposit. Look, if you're going to talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets, it has to start with the guy between the pipes, Sergey Bobrovsky. Get to know him as Bob. That's what he was known as when he came up with the Philadelphia Flyers. Goalie Bob. And the Bruins beat up on goalie Bob. If you remember back in 2011, that was one of the storylines when the Bruins in the Eastern Conference semifinals got rolling. They took it to goalie Bob, and that seems like a generation ago, Alex. But goalie Bob was certainly on his game after the first period of game number 1 against Tampa Bay. As a matter of fact, Alex, he gave up 8 goals in the entire series against Tampa Bay. Only 5 of them after the first period of game number 1 at Tampa Bay.
Yeah, he's not the guy we saw in 2011. Bruins fans can, throw that right out if that's kind of what they're counting on here over the next week or 2 weeks. This is a guy who's been one of the best goaltenders in the league. He's been right up there with Tuukka Rask in the last couple of years. Not as great of a season this year as maybe the last couple, but still upper echelon. And it's going to take a lot for the Bruins to beat him. The good news is they're coming off of a series where they faced a goaltender that didn't give them any freebies either. Anderson for Toronto, he was outstanding in the series. He was one of, if not the best player on the ice in most of the games in this first round series. So the Bruins are tested. They know nothing's going to come easy. They can sort of use, not a similar strategy. It's a new team, but they're not going to get discouraged because they've been against a Stonewall goalie and come through and won against Anderson. They know they can do it, so they got to be patient. They got to pick their spots. They got to count on their experience. And if they can do all that, goalie Bob's a tough nut to crack, but he's not unbeatable.
All right, Bobrovsky faced 117 shots in the first round series against Tampa Bay, and he stopped 109 of them. He was really that would work out to a goals against of 2.00, which certainly will win you most playoff series, and that's what Columbus is concerned about. Let's talk about the coach, John Tortorella. The Bruins beat him in his last playoff series, his last series of games with the New York Rangers way back in 2012 in the Eastern Conference semifinals. So the Bruins do have some history with John Tortorella, but I think the system and the defensive way that they played down the stretch, winning 7 of their last 8 regular season games to get into the playoffs, the team is believing in the Tortorella system, and certainly Tortorella can be very, very difficult on players.
Well, you go back to that New York series, and a guy who really stepped up for the Bruins at that time, and he was relatively unknown then. He's much more well-known now, was Torrey Krug. And Krug's a guy, I don't know that he had the best series for the Bruins in round one. Wasn't the worst, but he certainly left some chances out there. I think they're going to need another series from him again, because the way to beat John Tortorella's defense is to move the puck around the blue line efficiently and often and not turn the puck over. Right. Krug's the guy who's going to do that. So, again, not his best series against Toronto. Doesn't mean he's going to be a liability against Columbus, but if they can get Torrey Krug going, that's going to be the way to counter John Tortorella. And if you remember that series as well, when the Bruins got Tortorella's team in a corner, he'd get a little desperate. He'd get a little extreme, and the Bruins could take advantage of that. So I look for that again. The Bruins can't do what they did against Toronto and kind of come out haphazardly, a little bit slow, a little bit dry. They've got to come out and force Tortorella to make moves and make adjustments, because if he's going to panic, that's going to be a huge advantage for the Bruins.
All right, the Columbus Blue Jackets have a few names Bruins fans will certainly remember. Riley Nash, who had played a significant role for them, played 78 games throughout the regular season, and Adam McQuaid, who did not. He only played 14 games in the regular season. But beyond the former Bruins on this Columbus Blue Jackets roster, let's talk about Cam Atkinson and Nick Foligno and Seth Jones. I want to talk about those three players. They're all players who are young but have had now some NHL Stanley Cup playoff experience, and I think the Columbus Blue Jackets winning a playoff round for the first time in their franchise history since coming into existence in the year 2000, that's a big deal.
I think these are guys that, you know, when you have a young player, it kind of reminds me a little, and this is a really obscure comparison, but if you'll allow me, Trags, kind of like the early 2000s Patriots, in that they've never lost, and that's sort of an advantage. They just kind of go out not knowing what losing is and assuming they're going to win because that's all they've known now, right? This is what they did. They took it to not just the best team in the league this year, but a generational team in the Toronto Lightning and blew
Tampa Bay.
What did I say? Toronto? Yeah. Tampa Bay. Thank you very much. Blue and white. Both start with T. It's been a long night here at the Garden, whatever. You know, they blew a generational team right out of the building, and they, you know, to a certain extent, might go out there and assume that's what it's going to be every time out. Now, the Bruins can use that to their advantage and use their experience and kind of you know, take it to the young bucks, so to speak. But at the same time, this is a team that's going to be playing with a whole lot of confidence, specifically that young core. Seth Jones is a guy I really like. I think he has a chance to be a thorn in the side of the Bruins in this series. They need to make sure they have somebody keeping an eye on him at all times, limit what he is doing on both ends of the ice. Right. He can be a pain on both ends of the ice, and he's going to be playing with a lot of confidence. And when guys like that, when guys in Jones' position, right, we've seen it with Zdeno Chara a million times, when they feel like they're the best player, the most important player on the ice, and they can play up to that level, it can make their teams unbeatable. It's
going to be a fascinating series. The high-scoring Bruins, when they get their machine rolling against the defensive-minded John Tortorella-coached Columbus Blue Jackets. We'll have you covered on CLNSmedia.com, of course, and on Twitter @BruinsCLNS.